So Her Majesty the Queen marks history today, becoming the first monarch in our nation's history to mark 70 years on the throne.
Queen Elizabeth II has had a remarkable reign, serving Great Britain, Northern Ireland and over 2 billion Commonwealth citizens for 7 decades, with her children, grandchildren and, until last year, her beloved husband of 73 years, the Duke of Edinburgh.
Ascending to the throne in 1952, aged just 26, she has seen 14 prime ministers, represented the nation at its best and guided it through its worst, always with the most impeccable stoicism, grace and unwavering duty.
Despite many personal losses, unimaginable burdens and innumerable challenges, Her Majesty the Queen has been the backbone of the nation for the entirety of most Britain's living memory, and her legacy and achievements are simply remarkable.
The Queen last night expressed her desire that Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, should be titled Queen Consort when the Prince of Wales ascends to the throne.
But joining us now to discuss Her Majesty's incredible life and legacy is royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, thank you for joining us this morning.
Indeed, an absolutely extraordinary legacy, and Accession Day is a moment in our history which is one of those things that, well, it's quite hard to come to terms with, really. Very few people in Britain can remember a period when the Queen was not on the throne.
Yes, and if we can go back, Richard, to that time in 1952, this is always a very sad day for Her Majesty the Queen, because she was, of course, very close to her father, and she sees this as the anniversary of his death as well as the anniversary of her ascension to the throne. So she'll be thinking about that today as well, won't she?
She certainly will, and she mentioned this in her statement. She always stays at Sandringham until at least the 6th of February, because it was 70 years ago today that George VI died. This was something of a shock. He had been unwell, though it wasn't widely known how seriously he was ill for some time. But there's no question that this was a period that it was an age of deference. The Queen, 25, ascending to the throne with Churchill as Prime Minister, and also a time, clearly she must be reflecting on her father's remarkable record of service as wartime sovereign, and of course, and she paid tribute to him in her statement, her strength and stay, the Duke of Edinburgh. 73 years, just the most extraordinary partnership of opposites too, because the Queen, being somewhat cautious, I think, by nature and conservative, the Duke very sometimes abrasive, always experimenting, dynamic energy, and then the combination of this marking this absolutely amazing partnership for which we all benefited.
Yes, and I always think of that photograph of George VI waving Her Majesty the Queen off on the tour at that particular point in time. Of course, so poignant because they wouldn't see each other again. And getting that news in Kenya, it must have been a complete bolt out of the blue for Her Majesty. She probably thought she had another couple of years to spend in relative anonymity with her new husband of just a couple of years. But it all came to an end that day she got the news, Richard.
Indeed it did, and as you mentioned, this photograph, which has become famous, of a very gaunt, hatless George VI waving goodbye to Princess Elizabeth, as she was then, and Prince Philip, who were deputising for him on a tour that would take them. They first went to Kenya, but then they were going to the Antipodes. Subsequently, he was shooting the day before and then succumbed 7 decades ago. And of course, Churchill, surprised by the news, called it the worst. But an inspiration, because of course he was a shy, stammering naval officer. He never had intended nor wished to have the top job, but of course, owing to the abdication of his brother, Edward VIII, he became, I think, the ideal sovereign, symbolically, as as a royal couple, he and Queen Elizabeth have a very, very special place in the nation's hearts. And I think his dedication to duty, from which his health undoubtedly suffered, has inspired the Queen.
Some photographs there of Her Majesty the Queen arriving back, and that's her first time on British soil as the Queen. And you've made reference to the statement, the message, the platinum message that was put out last night by the Queen, Richard. And of course, it did have that message in it that she wanted Camilla to be referred to as Queen. That's a very significant statement by Her Majesty, isn't it?
It's very significant indeed. It's extremely dramatic. This wasn't expected, but it makes perfect sense because this issue hadn't been resolved. I mean, to allow the marriage to take in the circumstances of 2005 between the Prince of Wales and Camilla Parker Bowles, it was necessary to have what can only be called an invention, that one day she would become Princess Consort. There is no historical precedent for that, and it would have actually, I think, needed legislation. So this, in essence, this means that the Queen has personally intervened, and this basically it solves what was something of a dilemma, because if it had been announced when Prince Charles acceded, there would, I think, have been some controversy, certainly in the months before the coronation. So this was ensuring that the succession will be a smooth one at a very difficult time, of course, for the monarchy. I mean, there have been several such periods in the past, but in the last couple of years, and especially with Prince Andrew in disgrace and the Sussexes embittered, there's been a collection of stories that have hit the headlines. I mean, the advantage of being the world's most high-profile monarchy is that when things are going well, as they have for so much of the Queen's reign, of course, the benefits are enormous. When, as they have recently, there have been problems, then, of course, it's the reverse.
And throughout those periods of sort of rockiness in the royal family, the Queen herself has remained a real rock of stability. How do you think the situation will look moving into the future, sort of looking towards the future of the monarchy? Do you think we'll still have that solid reputation on the world stage?
Well, I think that the Queen has always symbolised continuity when there's been so much change, and I think that, and especially during the pandemic too, with her virtual broadcast, which was so superb, but also having a monarch above party politics, I think, is very, very significant, and her constitutional duties to be advised, encourage and warn, read the government speech, audiences with the Prime Minister, then the ability to have a Christmas message. I mean, the Prince Charles one day will take on exactly the same duties. He has an activist streak, and that wouldn't belong in the job which he will one day have the longest Prince of Wales period in waiting in history. But nonetheless, there's no doubt the Queen's legacy is extraordinary. The Commonwealth, she's more or less single-handedly held it together. And I think the highlight of her reign was the state visit to Ireland, because that put the seal on the Good Friday Agreement and was an enormous success.
And Charles has obviously been very greatly moved by what his mother has done, recognising, of course, that this could have been a difficult moment if it hadn't have been sorted out before she left us. And he has said that he's deeply conscious of the honour for his darling wife to be known as the Queen. That's quite a personal statement, isn't it, from Charles this morning?
It certainly is.
Oh, goodness. I wonder, have we lost Richard? I think. Oh, no, he's back. That's great. Go ahead, Richard.
this had been, of course, highly controversial. Looking back over the decades, and you'll notice that the Queen's statement, most particularly, is very optimistic. She's a deeply religious person. She is looking forward to what she sees as a positive future for Britain after difficult times in the pandemic. But if one looks back, of course, with the nightmarish marriage between Charles and Diana and what that led to, and the problems in the 1990s, and then Diana's tragic death and the public's unprecedented response to it, of course, the whole history of this and of his relationship with Camilla, this will undoubtedly excite emotions, but nothing like what it would have done had this been left. So I think that the Queen has very perspicaciously and very positively moved to ensure a smooth succession and deal with the matter now, and also deal with it on a historic day. She's got 2 more years to beat Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, who ruled for 72 years. So that's the least we could ask of her, because she's yet again mentioned when she was 21, she swore she would serve her whole life, and that vow, we see it again in the statement.
Well, Richard, you mentioned the poignancy of Her Majesty's visit to Ireland, but on a personal level, what is your favourite memory of the Queen sort of throughout her 70 years?
My personal memory, meeting her at the press reception at Buckingham Palace for journalists the eve of the Diamond Jubilee, that was absolutely delightful, and it showed she has such charm, such dignity and such grace, worlds away, I would add, from the Olivia Colman portrayal in The Crown. And also, I think that just the continuity in the various jubilees, just the memory also of so many Christmas messages, and the fact that everyone, all her subjects in Britain and in the Commonwealth, know very well that the Queen would never let them down, and she never has, inspired by the remarkable example of her father, and also the superhuman energy and the support of Prince Philip.
Well, I thought it was incredibly touching, Richard, that she signed off her message, "Your servant, Elizabeth." It was so touching and I think summed up her service and her duty to all of us. I tweeted this morning that we have been very blessed to live through this Elizabethan monarchy, and I very much feel that, and I'm sure everybody does as well. We're very blessed to have her as our sovereign.
Absolutely, and indeed you mentioned the idea of an Elizabethan age. I think that it's still the most popular portrait. Annie Goni's romantic way captured the Queen when she was in garter robes in the 1950s. And Churchill saw this as another Elizabethan age, whereas Elizabeth I and Victoria gave their names to an age. What I think we could say is that the Queen has carved a very special niche in the hearts of the people in Britain and in the Commonwealth. There's no one better known in the wider world as a head of state, and indeed, of course, she's the last head of state who's seen service in the Second World War, so she's one of the last remaining links with our finest hour in the Second World War too. Truly remarkable, and she conveyed this so brilliantly in those virtual broadcasts during the pandemic, quoting Dame Vera Lynn so movingly, and then the 75th anniversary of VE Day, and of course she was there herself celebrating outside the palace.
Well, Richard Fitzwilliam, royal commentator there, thank you for joining us on GB News this morning.